Hello and welcome, this is Starry here, and today I'll be reviewing another movie, this one being Incredibles 2. Just a reminder, I have in fact watched Incredibles 1 for anybody who's not smart enough to realize that. Uh, yeah, I please do realize that I did have a life before this channel was created. So anyways, this movie was released in 2018, directed by Brad Bird, stars Holly Hunter, Craig T. Nelson, Sarah Vowell, and many more. Uh, the basic plot of this movie is that now in the society that they're living in, The Incredibles, superheroes have now become illegal, and due to this, Elastagirl has found a new job that's basically trying to raise a better publicity to get superheroes back into the legal business. And meanwhile, all the while, she's fighting against a new mysterious supervillain that can hypnotize people. Also, another thing to mention is Mr. Incredible at this point does not have the job, and he's basically at home trying to learn how to be a parent. That's what this movie's about. And honestly, I quite enjoyed watching this movie. I think it was very entertaining, and it's been quite some time since the original Incredibles release, and since I watched the original Incredibles. So, if anything, I just think that they've hit it at home once again. I think this movie definitely delivered a lot in terms of what I was expecting from an Incredibles movie, and just very fun altogether. So that's all I really gotta say. Let's just move on to the first part of the review, being story. So, starting off with story, the first thing I'm going to mention is that The Incredibles is very much a family movie. I think a lot of people don't understand the distinction between what a children's movie and a family movie is. A children's movie being something that a child would really enjoy, but a parent would find it excruciating to watch on normal circumstances. While a family movie is something that people of all ages and all genders can come together and enjoy, and just honestly a fun all-around experience for the entire family. Second thing I would like to mention that this movie has a very unique plot, and it doesn't suffer from sequelitis. Sequelitis is essentially, to me, the difficulties of making a sequel to a very popular movie. When you're making your first movie, you have to worry about all the story and the characters, but once it does good and you get the money to make a second movie, not only have to worry about that once again, you have to worry about how your movie will expand and add on to your first movie, because that's what a sequel is supposed to do. And I think The Incredibles does that amazingly. It was definitely in a tough spot where it could have very much felt like it was going to repeat and just feel repetitive and formulaic, like a copy paste of its first movie, or it just feels way too different and doesn't feel like an Incredibles movie at all. And I'm glad that they struck that middle ground, and that the sweet spot, as I would call it, where it's just unique enough to be an enjoyable experience on its own, but not too different where it doesn't feel like it's invincible, for example. I also think this movie was quite suspenseful. It definitely had a lot of tense moments. And in terms of themes, I think I really enjoyed the themes of family and how the family had to bond, especially given the new, the new threat of superheroes becoming illegal. I think that provided a great chance and a great plot dynamic for the family in this movie. I also really like the themes of illegal heroes, like I mentioned before. I think it just does it's a really good way of taking the story to another level, not really another level, but making the story much more unique and making it feel less boring. And it's definitely a very realistic solution as well, because superheroes being illegal, I would definitely see that happening in the real world if superheroes existed here as well. I also really enjoyed how they reversed the gender roles, and how Elastigirl has to work and be the main dependent, like the main provider, while Mr. Incredible has to stay at home and learn how to be a dad. And I think that's just a really cool way of switching up like the dynamic here, especially given the first movie. So, if there's any problem I had with the story, I think that the pacing towards the end might have gotten a little too fast, but that's all I really have to say. Anyway, let's just move on to the next part of the review. So for characters, the first thing I would like to mention that I really enjoyed Mr. Incredible's characters and his development in this movie, with his parenting and how he has to learn how he has to learn to be a father and take care of three children all at once by himself, and not to mention that these three children have superpowers and all of them having these different problems in their lives, and it's a very good timing watching this movie, honestly, considering Father's Day is like today. I'm recording on June the 20th, but yeah, just honestly, he was just I enjoyed his development of trying to become a great dad. Second thing I really want to mention is that I enjoyed how they used Jack Jack. Jack Jack is a baby, so he obviously isn't old enough to have his own distinct personality and whatnot. So I can't judge him as a character, but Jack Jack could have very much felt annoying. He would just be the cute marketable type of thing, part of this movie, and just be a crutch for the rest of the people. But I enjoyed how they used his character, how he is kind of like a wild card. He's both troublesome and he can cause conflict, but he can help you when he needs to, or when the time comes. So I enjoyed how they handled his this very kind of dangerous plot device. I also think that the voice acting in this movie was quite good, honestly, but that's given because it's Pixar. So on to my problems. So I forgot to mention this before, but the characters are definitely the weakest part of this movie when compared to story, animation, and soundtrack, and that's because it just has way too many problems. The first one being is that the villain is honestly just bland. She's uninteresting, and even though she has a set motive and a believable motive, there's just nothing interesting about her. She's just very gloomy, and she hates her brother, and she hates superheroes, and that's about it. Compared to Syndrome, who was so much more interesting and zany and just full of personality, I think that they definitely fell back on the villain's part here. I also think that Elastagirl, who is essentially the main character of this movie, she hardly gets an arc, especially since halfway through the movie she gets hypnotized and she's basically out of the story until the climax. So yeah, that's definitely putting a wrench or a strain on my rating for her. And lastly, I've got to mention that Dash and Violet also are lacking development. They're definitely set up that Dash and Violet have some problems, especially Violet's boyfriend troubles, but those problems are only really created for Mr. Incredible to solve, and they're only there to help better Mr. Incredible's character. They're not there to help improve their own characters, and I feel like that's a major flaw for me. These two characters are definitely really interesting and could have been done in a really good way, but they were just wasted. For example, in the first movie, Dash and Violet had a very similar character arc, so they could have saved time. So they were able to save time and complete both their arcs using the same method. But in this movie, both characters have different problems and different things. So I feel like this movie's trying to juggle a bit too much, and that's given because this movie has 4 or 5 different main character heroes. So it is what it is. But I just wish that they could have done a better job. So starting off, I'll say that this movie's very well animated. Definitely one of the best animated movies I've seen. Just by animation, by animated, I mean just animation-wise and the aesthetics. Animated movies nowadays have really gotten just amazing to look at. Toy Story 4 being another one. They basically become photorealistic. It's almost it's really hard to tell at some points, especially when looking at background footage, just background shots, if this scene is real life or animated. And that's just a technological feat that I'm really proud of the movie industry and how far we've come, especially given the 2D era and the drawing ages of animating movies like this, like Snow White, for example. I also really think that the animation did a good job at doing a lot of action sequences. I think the action sequences are really well choreographed, were easy to follow, and just really tense, honestly. it's just great action sequences. I think one of the best in any like animated movie. I also think that this the movie has some good shots, but here comes my main criticism. It doesn't really take the time to be a bit more creative with its sort of cinematography, as I would say. It doesn't have any amazing looking shots or anything iconic looking. Because most of the shots are okay and enough to be enough to be a close up or enough to be a wide, but nothing ever takes any liberties and experiments with how they're going to take a specific shot and maybe include some symbolism or whatnot. So that's my one gripe with it. Anyways, aside from animation, let's go on to the next point, which is soundtrack. So for soundtrack, the first thing I have to say is that the main Incredibles theme is really iconic, and I honestly just enjoy it a very lot. The exact theme I'm talking about, the one with the trumpets and everything. It's a theme that everybody remembers, especially given the first movie and how well that one did. And I'm glad they reused it here because honestly, creating a whole new soundtrack would have been a mistake, concerning how iconic the first one was. I also think that this movie has some really good filler tracks where they were quite iconic as well, and they really fit the tone of this movie. And one thing after listening to the soundtrack, I will point out is it's a very spy themed soundtrack. A lot of it sounds like something, almost like Cowboy Bebop tank style, or some other Mission Impossible. And I just really enjoy that because this movie is not really that a spy movie, but it definitely fits in that category, and it's a really cool aesthetic to have for The Incredibles. If there's one gripe I had, or one problem I have with the soundtrack, is I wish that they had used and fully utilized its OST a bit more and given us those sweet musical sequences that I really love, where the story or the movie just kicks back, turns down all other volumes except the soundtrack and just lets that thing blast while you just sip. You can just lay back and enjoy what's happening on screen. And this movie is really missing one of those, whether it be a montage or an action sequence. I just wish that it had it in any shape or form. Either way, that's all I really have to say about the soundtrack. Let's move on to my overall thoughts. So overall, my pros for this movie is I think it's a very well handled plot. I really like the themes of family and illegal heroes, as well as the reversing of the gender roles. I also think that Mr. Incredible's character arc was good, and the use of Jack Jack, and the voice acting is also pretty good as well. I think that the animation is great looking. It's one of the best looking, visually appealing animated movies, and the action sequences are also really well choreographed, as well as this movie having a really iconic main theme and just an all around great soundtrack. In terms of cons, I think that towards the end, the pacing was a little bit fast. I think that characters such as Elastagirl, Violet, and Dash needed a bit more development and on a much more cohesive story arc. And the villain was also really bland and just uninteresting, at least compared to Syndrome. I also think that in terms of animation or cinematography, there weren't really any amazing shots or anything iconic that stood out from the rest, as well as there not being any musical sequences in this movie. And that leads me to the final score, that being 7 out of 10. There's no other additional awards that I'll give The Incredibles, and the reason I'm giving it 7, not an 8, is because of all the problems with the characters. Like I mentioned, characters are the weakest point of this movie, and had they given a bit more of a better arc to Elastigirl, Violet, and Dash, I think I would have probably given this movie a tier higher. And the reason I'm not giving this movie a 6 is because honestly, it was just very enjoyable, and despite the characters being really quite a weak part of the movie, the rest of the movie, such as story, animation, and soundtrack, just really uplifted it, and that's what gave it a 7. So that's all I really have to say, I guess, for this movie. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I guess I'll be signing off for this one. Bye.